Okay, this is going to be our first video for the weekend of April 1st and 2nd, prom weekend, and we're going to be doing the middle of Unit 12 here with civil rights, and then we might get into a few other things here too. But we're starting off video 1 with civil rights. I'm picking up after the Selma March. So we already talked about Selma and the march that led towards eventually towards the Voting Rights Act. Now I'm going to talk about the Freedom Summer. So some younger college-age kids were getting tired of the slowness of some of these nonviolent protests, and so in the summer of '64, you're going to have students who are going to decide to go down to Mississippi to do this campaign to basically get people to register to vote. So this is the year before the Voting Rights Act is passed, and this is before the 24th Amendment is passed as well, too. But in the summer of '64, you're going to see thousands of college students come from the north down to the south, mostly Mississippi, to help organize African-American voters and help to get them registered. That way you can increase votership and so on. Thousands will descend upon Mississippi, a majority of which are actually white, not black, when they come down here. The leaders of this movement were John Lewis. You can see John Lewis here. John Lewis was a civil rights activist who served along King, and he actually is a current congressman from Georgia now, so he's still active in politics currently. So John Lewis was leading SNCC and leading this march here. And it's not march, but this campaign to get people registered to vote here in the summer of '64. So was Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer is this lady right here. She also worked the Freedom Summers. She was also a leader of SNCC, and she also fought to get African Americans registered in the Democratic Party in Mississippi. So these are all things both these people were working for at the time. There was a lot of resistance towards this. This is before like I said, this is before the act comes out. There were people who were, gave a lot of these guys the cold shoulder and protested against them. In fact, 3 of the people who, in the first day they were down there, 3 guys got kidnapped and eventually were found dead weeks later. 2 of which were from the north and were white. So 3 men, 2 of which were captured and killed, and one black man from Mississippi. Which is one example of this, and it was local KKK who did it too. But the point here is that SNCC kept doing it. SNCC did it one summer in '64. They come back, do it again in '65 and '66. So they're doing it when they have time off after college, and it does prove effective because by the end of the decade, you're going to see a lot of African Americans register in the South being able to vote. And so African American, so this campaign was successful. So keep in mind that the Freedom Summers in '64 and the Selma Marches in '65 both helped contribute towards the passage of the Voting Rights Act in late summer of '65 the next year. Okay, so now we're moving on to the more aggressive parts of civil rights. Let's go to a new slide. So the kind of the mid-'60s, you're going to see the civil rights movement kind of get a little bit more aggressive for various reasons. First, looking at Malcolm X. Seeking a new cultural identity based on African Islam, the black Muslim leader Elijah Muhammad preached this new, or developed this new religion, or this new kind of like hybrid denomination called Black Islam, or the Black Muslims. So in the 40s and 50s, Malcolm X is going to follow this person, Elijah Muhammad, eventually. But basically, it takes together different cultural aspects of black nationhood, mixes in with Islam, and creates this kind of new religion. Malcolm X grew up Malcolm Little, very smart guy, but was not given a lot of motivation as a kid. Goes to jail after getting involved in some robberies. While he's in jail around 1949, 1950, he decides to convert to the Nation of Islam, or black Muslims, as they're called, under the leadership of Elijah Muhammad while he's in jail. He changed his name from Malcolm Little to Malcolm X because he didn't know his original tribal name, and he wanted to throw off his slave name, so he decides to call himself Malcolm X from that point forward. But while in jail, he develops these ideas of black nationalism, essentially that blacks should grow and develop their own communities and do everything in the communities on their own. He also promotes things like black separatism and self-improvement. So it's kind of the same vein as Marcus Garvey from the 1920s. Malcolm X, and this is Malcolm X here and here, Malcolm X wants black separatism. He doesn't want blacks dealing with whites. He wants them to live in their own societies, doing things on their own. Black schools, black businesses, black grocery stores. where they're not relying upon white society. He also not just preaches these ideas of black nationalism and black pride and black separatism, he also preaches a more militant self-defense idea. So after he gets out of jail, he's now this Muslim leader of this movement, but he also promotes this concept of self-defense. This is where he differs the most from King. King always preached nonviolent protest, and Malcolm X says, no, you don't go out and attack white people or whoever, but if you get attacked, you should attack back. So this obviously is going to become a bit controversial to a lot of people, and moderate blacks didn't necessarily care for Malcolm X and some of his ideas, but they were getting tired of being beaten up and kicked around and so on, so that he promoted this idea of self-defense. Now, Malcolm X also doesn't come from the South. He comes from the North, where there's not legal segregation, but prejudices were still very much apparent there, too. So throughout the 50s, he's going to eventually gain thousands of followers and help grow the black Muslim group as a result. He called MLK an Uncle Tom, and he advocates for self-defense. In the early 60s, because of some things that Elijah Muhammad did with some of his followers, Malcolm X broke off, I think it's either in 63 or 64, broke off and made his own group called Afro-American Unity. So he founded this other group called Afro-American Unity, or the Organization of Afro-American Unity in the early 60s. But it continued the same messages, black separatism, and so forth, and self-defense and those kind of ideas. In 64, he went to a trip to Mecca. Every Muslim has to, at some point in his life, make a trip to Mecca. So he goes on his lifetime trip to Mecca, spends a few months there, and kind of rediscovers some things about himself and discovers a different world of Muslims and so on. Comes back with a different perspective. When he comes back, he delivers this famous speech called the Ballad or Bullet speech. So after his trip to Mecca, he comes back to America and delivers the Ballad or Bullet speech, essentially saying, he basically tones down a lot of what his message said. He now says, let's try to make change through elections, through voting, the ballot, before we try to make change through aggressive means, the bullet. And that's the message here. So in the Ballad of the Bullet speech that he gives in 64, he tones his message down, which upsets some of his followers. But the idea is that let's make change through voting first, and then if that doesn't work, then we get aggressive. Well, a lot of his people weren't happy about this, and some of the black Muslim people who he left were also upset with Malcolm X. And so while he was delivering a speech in February of 65 in Harlem, he was actually gunned down by 3 black men in this theater. So while he was giving this message or the speech in February 65, Malcolm X is gunned down by his own people, by 3 black men, because of his turn and his way he changed his ideas about himself and so on there in 65. So his death is also labeled assassination, but he's kind of always seen as this foil to MLK, where he is much more militant, much more aggressive. And King and these other guys didn't necessarily promote the same things that he did. Black nationalism, sure, these ideas of black pride, great, but not the militant approach. Because guys like King felt like this was counterintuitive, that whites only become more fearful, more frightened by you if that's going to be your message. But that's Malcolm X, and he develops a good following, and those ideas continue after his death too. So you're going to see these other movements happen in the 60s, Black Power as well. In the summer of 66, the leader of SNCC at that time was a guy named Stokely Carmichael. Stokely Carmichael, this man right here, became the leader of SNCC as of the summer of 66. This is the 3rd summer they've done the Freedom Summers in Mississippi. And this guy is getting tired of all the racial prejudice. He's been beaten up and he's been arrested several times now. And after his, I don't even know how many times it was at this point, it's like 60-something arrests, he says enough's enough, and he wants to change the movement to develop this idea of black power. So he begins to kind of reshape SNCC to promote this concept of black power as opposed to more inclusion. So black power, essentially, that's created by Stokely Carmichael and other SNCC members, is this idea of black separatism and black nationalism too, promoting black communities and making black communities stronger. In fact, SNCC stopped accepting white members and started to kick out white members as a result, because they wanted to have create an organization that only promoted black culture and was only relying upon blacks as a result too. So that is something that develops in the South in the 60s, mid-60s and 66 under Stokely Carmichael. And they actually, ironically, repudiate nonviolence, even though that's part of their name, and advocate black power, a more militant approach. At the exact same time this is happening in Mississippi, later that same year, around the fall, you have the Black Panthers form in Oakland, California. So Black Panthers form, and you can see some images of them here and here. They form at the same time in like Oakland, which they don't necessarily start black power, but they have a lot of the same ideas. Black Panthers started because they had a lot of issues with white authorities. A lot of white authority figures would come to these black neighborhoods and beat up on blacks or intimidate blacks or arrest them for no reason, and they said enough's enough. So the Black Panthers formed as a way to protect their own neighborhoods and try to keep white authorities out. So the Black Panthers would patrol, some would try to get the white officers to stay out. Sometimes they get in shootouts with the white officers. But their whole idea was to make a more militant group to help protect black communities away from white authorities. What's also kind of weird about the Black Panthers is that they also do a lot of community service projects too. They offer things like child daycares. They offer things like free healthcare clinics for elderly and elderly assistance and homeless assistance. So they actually do a lot of community programs too to help their black communities. But it's the same ideas, right? Being more militant, self-defense, and also trying to create these ideas of black community that don't need whites. So Malcolm X's ideas are obviously influential, and then eventually you're going to get these groups that form like Black Power in the South, and then Black Panthers out in the West Coast. And Black Panthers will eventually spread, and they'll have chapters throughout the country, but that's where it all begins here in '66 at the same time. All right, the rioting. So the shift in a lot of North and Western blacks are becoming more and more frustrated with the whole civil rights movement, because you could easily change how somebody. You could easily change laws that were Jim Crow or whatever, because all you had to do was change the law. But you can't necessarily change how people feel about things, which is why we get these ideas of de facto and de jure segregation. De jure segregation is where you have segregation by law. De facto is where you have it by practice. So the South, it was pretty easy to get rid of segregation because all you had to do was change the laws. That's de jure segregation. So Jim Crow laws is de jure segregation. But up north and out west, where they don't hire you based on your race, or you can't live in a white neighborhood and they treat you differently because you're black, that's de facto segregation, which is a lot harder to face because you can't easily just make somebody move to a different area to fix a problem. So this is an issue that they're trying to address more so in the north and out west in this time period. And more blacks in these areas are becoming resistant towards white authorities because they're tired of being pushed around, and they're getting frustrated with the civil rights movement because they feel like it's not being effective. And so a lot of cities begin to get more aggressive as a result. In 1964, you have a riot in Harlem. There was a black, I think 15-year-old boy killed in Harlem by white police officers. There was days of riots there. In the next year in Watts is in L.A., and there was a massive racial riot that goes on for about a week where over hundreds of thousands of property damage was created. In fact, I think it was millions of dollars of property damage was created. But it's the same idea. They're protesting over the same issues. They're protesting over the issues of African Americans and whites not getting along with each other in society and being frustrated because there's not an easy solution. So a lot of property damage. Some people get arrested here in the Watts riots, or hundreds of people get arrested, but also some people die there too. 34 die in the Watts riots, and they destroyed 700 buildings. So, point being is that there's a lot of frustration that's developing here in the North and the West because of these racial tensions between the whites and blacks as a result. I don't have it on my screen, but there was actually a federal investigation done in '68 called the Kerner Commission, spelled K-E-R-N-E-R, Kerner Commission. It concluded that racism and segregation were chiefly responsible for these riots and these problems, and it was also a result of white authorities over black communities and so on causing the problems too. And so Johnson will try to address these issues more in his later term, but not to the degree it needs to be addressed. And so you're still going to have some of these issues. But you see de facto segregation is a lot more frustrating and a lot harder to fight against, and you see that a whole lot more happening in different parts of the country that are not the South, because you can't just simply change a law like that and make it better. You have to change how people think and opportunities and where people live, and that's not an easy solution. So we're going to stop the first video there for this unit and go to the next one.